Ladies and gentlemen, listen to me carefully. There is a sacred simplicity to awakening. It does not demand belief, ritual, or effort in the way the mind expects. Instead, it requires something much more radical to be fully here. Presence is the doorway, and God, if we are to use that word, not as a distant deity, but as the very stillness behind all things, is found only through this doorway. The human mind is deeply conditioned to perceive life as a linear journey measured in time, past, present, future. This perception gives rise to the illusion that awakening is somewhere ahead of us, something to be attained through effort, discipline, or the accumulation of knowledge. However, true awakening does not occur in the future. It cannot, because the future does not exist except as a mental concept. What we call the future is only a projection of the mind. Similarly, the past is a memory, a mental echo of what once was. The only reality that is ever truly alive is this moment. Is to realize the extraordinary power of now, not merely as an idea or spiritual slogan, but as a living experience. This moment is not just a fleeting point between what was and what will be. It is the gateway into eternity. It is where life actually happens. Every breath, every sensation, every perception, these occur in the now. There is no experience outside of it. Most people live in continuous psychological time, where the present is rarely more than a means to get to some imagined better future. This constant movement toward the next thing robs the now of its sacredness. It leads to a state of perpetual dissatisfaction. No matter how much we accomplish, the mind says, "What's next?" But if you pause, if you become still and attend deeply to what is here without needing it to be different, a shift occurs. That shift is the beginning of awakening. This presence is not passive. It is not dull. It is alive, vibrant, alert. When you are fully present, your senses sharpen. You begin to notice the subtle aliveness in your body, the texture of sound, the space between thoughts. Time seems to slow down or even dissolve. There is a stillness, but it is not empty. It is full of intelligence, of peace, and in that stillness there is a subtle recognition. This is what I've been looking for. This moment reveals something that thought cannot grasp. It reveals being, and being is not separate from what we might call the divine. It is not something added to your life. It is your essential nature. When the need to mentally label, judge, or analyze fades, you begin to rest in what simply is. And in that resting, there is great depth. The now does not need to be dramatic to be profound. A quiet room, a bird's song, the feeling of breath entering and leaving the body, these are not obstacles to awakening, but invitations. It is only the mind's belief that something more is needed that veils the sacredness of the moment. To recognize the power of now is to step out of illusion. It is to meet life directly without the filter of thought. It is to realize that God, truth, or peace is not elsewhere. It is here, always, waiting only for your attention. The ego is not a thing, but a process, a pattern of thought that continuously seeks to define, protect, and separate. It is the voice in the head that says, "This is who I am," based on memories, roles, achievements, opinions, and the labels assigned by society. It thrives on identification, with form, with story, with time. This mental structure creates a sense of me and mine, giving rise to a false self that exists only in contrast to other. It is this false self, the ego, that obscures the direct experience of presence, which is the still, spacious awareness underneath all mental activity. At its core, the ego is deeply unconscious. It operates automatically, continuously seeking validation, control, and certainty. It wants to be right, to be seen, to be superior, or, if it cannot be superior, to be victimized and justified in its suffering. In either case, it maintains itself by clinging to an identity, often built from past experience and future expectation. The ego avoids the present moment because in the now, its story is unnecessary. In the now, it has no ground to stand on. When we speak of awakening, we speak of a disidentification from this mental construct. We do not fight the ego or judge it, for that would only be the ego in another form, resistance. Instead, we observe it. Through observation, we create space, and in that space, awareness dawns. We begin to recognize that we are not the voice in the head. We are the one who is aware of it. This realization is not an intellectual one. It is a shift in identity from form to formlessness, from thought to awareness. It is not a matter of becoming someone new, but of seeing clearly who we are not. The ego says, I am what I think. I am what I feel. I am what has happened to me. Presence says, I am. Just that. Without addition, without condition, as long as we are identified with the ego, we live in separation. We see ourselves as isolated beings, each struggling for survival, recognition, and love. This sense of separateness breeds fear, competition, and suffering. But when we step back and witness the mind instead of being immersed in it, we begin to sense a deeper connectedness to life, not as a concept, but as a living truth. This is why the ego resists stillness. It resists silence. In silence, there is no identity to hold on to. In stillness, there is nothing to do, nothing to be, no future to run toward or past to relive. The ego, which feeds on noise and distraction, begins to fade when it is no longer being unconsciously reinforced. This fading is often experienced as uncomfortable at first. There may be fear or confusion, but if we remain present, without collapsing back into mental narratives, something extraordinary reveals itself. There arises a sense of spaciousness around thoughts and emotions. You may still experience anger, sadness, or fear, but they are no longer who you are. They arise, they are felt, and they pass. This is the beginning of freedom. You no longer need to defend a self-image. You no longer need to control every moment. The need to constantly judge, compare, or interpret begins to dissolve. In its place arises a quiet intelligence, a peaceful awareness that is unshaken by circumstance. What we call God in this context is not external, not separate. It is the very awareness in which the ego arises and subsides. When we disidentify from ego, we do not become empty, we become present. We do not lose ourselves, we discover our true nature. This nature is still, silent, and profoundly alive. It is not disturbed by praise or blame, gain or loss. It simply is. The ego is clever. It can even disguise itself as spiritual seeking. It can use spiritual concepts to reinforce its own sense of superiority, or to create new identities like the awakened one, the healer, or the enlightened student. True awakening is humble. It does not seek to be known. It does not seek to dominate or convert. It simply rests in awareness, quietly serving life from a place of deep presence. There is no need to wage war against the ego. In fact, the very desire to eliminate it is often egoic in nature. What is needed is attention, the gentle, consistent attention that sees the ego's movements without becoming them. Over time, this attention grows stronger. The ego's grip loosens. The space of presence expands. And in that space, peace is no longer dependent on outer conditions. Awakening is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming real. When the ego no longer runs your life, you begin to act from presence rather than reactivity. You listen deeply, you speak with awareness, you move through the world without the constant pressure to be someone, achieve something, or prove your worth. This is the gift of disidentification from ego. It opens the door to a life of authenticity, simplicity, and quiet joy. In truth, what stands between you and the divine is not sin, not unworthiness, but simply identification, with the voice in the head, with the idea of me. When you see that clearly, even for a moment, you taste freedom. And from that taste comes the quiet knowing, I am not the ego, I am that in which it arises. I am presence. Stillness is not the absence of sound, movement, or thought, but a dimension of awareness that exists beneath the surface of all activity. It is the background out of which all experience arises, the quiet field that holds every moment. In our usual state of mind, we are so absorbed in doing, planning, analyzing, and reacting that we rarely, if ever, notice this deeper dimension. And yet, it is only in touching this stillness that we come into contact with what can be called the divine, not as a belief or an idea, but as a living presence. The mind, by its nature, is active. It constantly interprets, labels, remembers, and anticipates. It believes that through more thinking, it can solve the mystery of life, find peace, or reach God. But the divine is not something the mind can grasp, because it is not an object among other objects. It cannot be found through striving or intellectual effort. It reveals itself in the absence of mental noise. It is the formless that becomes known only when we rest in formless awareness. Stillness, then, is not something we achieve. It is something we notice. It is always there, like the sky behind the clouds. Even when there is noise around us or emotional turbulence within us, the stillness is untouched. It is not created by circumstances. It is revealed when we no longer resist what is. In other words, it is not the external world that needs to change for us to find peace. It is the quality of our attention that must shift. When we become still, truly still, we begin to perceive life differently. The ordinary becomes radiant, a tree, a breath, a bird call. Suddenly these are not things to be categorized, but expressions of something vast and sacred. We begin to feel the subtle aliveness in all things, including ourselves. And this feeling is not emotional in the usual sense. It is not excitement, nor even happiness as we commonly define it. It is a quiet joy, an inner wholeness, a sense of belonging without needing to belong to anything or anyone. The gateway to this stillness is awareness, not a forced or focused awareness, but a relaxed, open noticing of what is happening right now, without judgment, without commentary. When you sit quietly and become aware of your breath, not controlling it but simply noticing it, you are touching the stillness. When you listen fully to a sound without naming it, you are present. When you feel the aliveness in your hands or sense the energy in your body without needing to label it, you are returning to that which is deeper than the mind. In this space, there is no separation between you and life. The sense of a separate self begins to dissolve. You no longer feel like a small identity navigating a world of objects. You feel instead that you are life itself, experiencing itself through this particular form. This shift does not remove your uniqueness or your human experience. It simply roots it in something greater. You begin to live not from personality alone, but from presence. Religious traditions have long spoken of God as omnipresent, as that which is everywhere and in everything. Stillness is the direct experience of that presence. It is the felt sense of unity that needs no explanation. You do not have to believe in God to encounter this. It requires no doctrine, no dogma. In fact, belief often becomes a substitute for direct experience. But stillness asks for nothing except attention, pure, receptive attention to what is right now. There is a paradox here. The moment you try to get to stillness, it eludes you. Why? Because the one who is trying to attain it is the mind again, the seeker, the doer, the controller. Stillness is not an object to be reached. It is what remains when the effort stops. It is the silence beneath the striving, and yet this silence is not empty. It is full, full of presence, full of awareness, full of life. In this fullness, you begin to sense something sacred, not separate from the world, but shining through it. The divine is not found in the extraordinary, though it may express itself there. It is found in the deeply ordinary, when the ordinary is seen without the filter of thought. Washing the dishes, walking down the street, sitting in a chair, these can all become sacred acts when done in stillness, not because of what you are doing, but because of how you are being. Stillness does not remove us from the world, it reconnects us to it. It allows us to act with clarity, to speak with kindness, to respond instead of react. It infuses daily life with meaning, not the meaning given by the mind, but the meaning that comes from being fully present. In this state, even simple moments carry a depth that cannot be explained, only felt. When you are still, you are not cut off from life. You are more fully alive than ever before. And in this aliveness, the divine is not a theory or a distant force. It is here, it is now, it is what you are. Suffering is often viewed as a mistake, a failure, or something to be eliminated as quickly as possible. It is usually resisted, repressed, or numbed through distraction or denial. And yet, in the journey toward awakening, suffering has a strange and paradoxical role. It becomes a catalyst, a teacher, a threshold. Though painful, it often serves as the doorway through which one begins to question the structures of the mind, the assumptions of the ego, and the narratives that have long gone unexamined. In this way, suffering is not the opposite of awakening, but often its beginning. For many, suffering is the moment when life no longer conforms to the expectations we have built. Something falls apart, perhaps a relationship, a job, a sense of identity or control. What once felt stable becomes unstable. What once felt secure becomes threatened. In these moments, the ego's usual strategies no longer work. The mind may spin in confusion, fear, or grief, but something deeper begins to stir beneath the noise, the question of what is real, what truly matters, and what cannot be taken away. If suffering is met unconsciously, it often leads to deeper entanglement, more resistance, more blame, more psychological pain. But if met with awareness, suffering begins to reveal its hidden nature. It points us inward. It strips away illusion. It shows us that peace, happiness, and meaning cannot be sustained through outer conditions alone. When the outer forms dissolve, we are left with something raw, something real. And it is in this rawness that awakening becomes possible. The ego resists suffering because suffering exposes its fragility. It reveals the illusion of control and permanence. The ego depends on certain roles, attachments, and stories to maintain a sense of identity. When those are threatened or lost, it reacts with fear or despair. But the deeper truth is this: suffering only intensifies when we identify with it. When we say, "This pain is mine," or "I am this sadness," we become trapped in it. But when we bring awareness to suffering without identification, when we observe it without labeling ourselves by it, a space opens up. That space is not empty. It is full of presence. It is full of intelligence, clarity, and compassion. In that space, suffering becomes a messenger rather than an enemy. It begins to show us what we have avoided, where we are still clinging, where we are not free. It may highlight the ways we have sought fulfillment outside ourselves, the places we have neglected to look within, or the identities we have unconsciously constructed and defended. To suffer consciously is not to suppress emotion or pretend to be unaffected. It is to feel fully, without becoming the feeling. It is to allow the waves of pain to move through the body and mind, while knowing that what you are is the awareness in which these waves arise and fall. This realization transforms suffering into insight. It deepens presence. It humbles the ego, softens the heart, and widens the space of being. It is in the aftermath of great suffering that people speak of having discovered a depth they never knew before. They may say that in their darkest moments they touched something unshakable within themselves. a peace that did not come from circumstances, a stillness that was not affected by the chaos around it. This is not romanticizing pain. It is recognizing that within pain, when met with consciousness, lies the seed of awakening. Suffering also awakens compassion. When you have seen your own pain clearly, without running from it, you become more open to the pain of others. Judgment softens. The need to categorize or separate diminishes. You recognize a shared human condition, a common longing for peace, and a mutual vulnerability. This recognition does not make you weak. It connects you more deeply to life. It allows love to emerge, not sentimental love, but the quiet strength of being with what is as it is. It is important to note that awakening through suffering does not mean seeking pain or staying stuck in it. It means using the pain that life inevitably brings as a path to truth. It means no longer avoiding discomfort at all costs, but entering it with awareness. This does not require dramatic or tragic events. Even subtle frustrations, minor losses, or feelings of emptiness can be used as portals when met consciously. The question is never whether suffering will arise. It will. The question is how we meet it. Do we contract around it, resist it, and become it? Or do we open to it, listen to it, and let it point us beyond itself? When suffering becomes conscious, it ceases to be just pain. It becomes purification. It burns away illusion. It humbles, clarifies, and grounds us. It does not remove us from life. It initiates us more deeply into it, and through this process, the one who suffers, the egoic self, begins to dissolve. What remains is not broken, but whole, not empty, but deeply present. When met with presence, does not close us off from the divine. It opens us to it, not as a belief, not as a hope for escape, but as the very presence in which all things, including pain, arise. This presence is what we are, and it is through the fire of suffering that we often come to know it. Awakening is not something we achieve through striving, seeking, or intellectual understanding. It is a return to what has always been here, the silent, unchanging presence beneath the surface of thought, identity, and form. It is the discovery that what we are is not the story we tell ourselves, not the labels we wear, and not the past we carry. We are the space in which all of that arises. This realization is not distant. It is immediate, available in the stillness of this very moment. As we begin to disidentify from the ego and the voice of the mind, we come to rest in something deeper, quieter, and far more vast. This presence is not cold or detached. It is warm, alive, compassionate. It listens without judgment, sees without distortion, and acts without fear. It is not yours or mine. It is simply the essence of being itself. The journey is not about becoming something new, but shedding what is false. And life, in its wisdom, gives us all that we need to awaken, through presence, through suffering, through stillness, through every ordinary moment we have overlooked. Every experience, whether joyful or painful, becomes a pointer back to what is real. In the silence of now, without the interference of thought or the grasping of self, the divine is no longer a concept. It is known directly, not as an object to be worshipped from afar, but as the very ground of our being. In that knowing there is peace, not the peace of avoidance or passivity, but the peace that passes understanding, a still, luminous knowing that this is it, this moment, this breath, this life. You do not need to wait. You do not need to be more. You only need to be here fully, because in the depths of presence you will see there is nothing missing. You are already home.